8:30.
The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
Brighton's on the move. She's not what she used to be. And you, whoever you think you are, you won't last. I haven't even started.
He ain't even started, has he? It's Brighton Rock 2011 version. I guess maybe some people aren't even in the knowledge that there was an original one, perhaps. Lena Lamont's in to review this one and another one. G'day there.
Good morning.
Brighton Rock originally came out in 1947.
That's right.
Isn't it?
Yeah. And Richard Attenborough starred as Pinky, who is the protagonist in this film. He's a young runner in a criminal gang, and he definitely has high hopes for himself. Very, very early on in the film, the gang's boss is murdered, and Pinky hoists himself to the top of the gang. It's quite an extraordinary thing for somebody, an underling, to do. And Richard Attenborough is renowned for having played Pinky back in the olden days. Let's not forget, of course, this is based on a Graham Greene novel. So the novel is fantastic. The original film is fantastic. There's a lot riding on a 2011 remake, it must be said.
Did you see the original film?
I didn't yet.
You didn't? Okay.
And I know we talked about this, but I didn't.
I saw it last year, and yeah, it held up really, really well. Mm-hmm. There was some aspects to it. You're like, oh, it's so 1947.
Yeah.
I'd be really interested to see what the remake is like.
Well, the other thing, as I understand it, Rowan Joff, if that's how we say his name, who's the director of this film, who, interestingly or not, wrote the film The American, the George Clooney film that was out last year, which was a wonderful, very subtle European kind of crime thriller. So Rowan Joff now is directing this film, Brighton Rock. And as I understand it, he decided to do an adaptation of the book rather than a remake of the movie.
Now, because the book is quite dark and sinister and whatnot,
very
right?
much so, very.
But they couldn't quite replicate that in 1947. It wouldn't have been appropriate.
Right, there's bound to be so much that they couldn't get away with in 1947 that now they totally can. So this film is very, very dark and really nasty. I immediately came out thinking, this is a nasty piece of work.
Wow.
But not in a torture porn way, not like Saw or Hostel or that kind of nastiness. Do you know what I mean? It's an extremely well-made English olden days. They've actually transposed this to 1964. So we've got the mods and the rockers riding around on scooters around Brighton Pier. It's all very, the comb in your breast pocket to slick your hair back. It's a wonderful era that's evoked.
Funnily enough, though, looking at the trailer, I recognise all these scenes from
other films? From the original?
From the original,
right,
as well.
Right.
So even though they may not have replicated the original, I think they've certainly paid homage.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, basically, you've got a source story, haven't you? So you can't really change it very much.
Yeah.
And obviously, they've kept the same characters and the same plot trajectory. And more people need to know is that Pinky is a nasty piece of work, as I say, runner in a criminal gang who then becomes a bit of a tough guy.
Yeah.
Actually, let's be honest, he's a tough guy from the beginning. Kind of charismatic in that really sort of sociopathic way. He commits a crime. They realise that this young woman who works in one of the local tea shops may well have seen him. So he ingratiates himself into her life and sort of seduces her in a way. And she is sufficiently vulnerable to fall for it. And it is cringe. You can't help but cringe as you watch this doomed romance.
Yeah.
Because we know what he's like. And we see her vulnerability, and we see why she's attracted to him, but we're also kind of like, just be careful,
Yeah, it's kind of like the unwholesome version of the Leader of the Pack kind of scenario.
I don't know the Leader
Well,
of the Pack.
Like the song, Leader of the Pack.
Right, yes.
The attraction to the bad boy biker.
And it is, and there's this quote where he says to her, we're made for one another because I'm bad and you're good. And she goes, effectively she's like, yeah, that's awesome.
Grease, it's not.
It's like a darker version of Grease. Yeah, actually, I don't know that anyone's actually. But it is definitely a way darker version than that. It's got a wonderful cast. We've got Helen Mirren in it, John Hurt, Phil Davis, and of course the main guy is Sam Riley. Now, did you see Control a couple of years ago?
I haven't seen that yet. Shame on me.
It's an amazing film. First film directed by a sort of a celebrity photographer called Anton Corbijn. Made this magnificent film, Control. Sam Riley played Ian Curtis, the lead singer of Joy Division. That was his first acting role. He'd been packing T-shirts in a warehouse or something in the lead up to that.
Yeah.
He'd done a bit of drama school and that, but, basically he'd thought, acting's not for me. And he was just stupendous. And he really does have a knack for that deep inner torment,
Right.
I guess. Yeah.
Cool. All right, Brighton Rock. What you'd give it a few stars then?
Yeah,
Yeah.
It was 3.5 for sure. Yeah, it was good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, on to something completely different now.
It was planned.
I mean, not everyone goes up to Victoria Park with a brick and a stocking in their bag.
And that they could imagine that they could get away with it, that it looked to make it look like an accident.
So they did exactly what they shouldn't have done in order to be together. Look what they did. That gesture, that thinking, that preparing, that getting the brick and putting it in that stocking, that was a mind. That was a mind without the heart.
There had been the
We're looking at
odd
a brand new documentary here, aren't we, Lena?
Yeah, this is interesting. Pretty much everybody in New Zealand will remember, obviously they weren't necessarily alive for it, but will remember the Parker and Hume murder case back in Christchurch in, I think, 1952-53.
Yep.
2 young girls in a very intense friendship who felt threatened by the fact that that one of them was going to be moving abroad and the other wasn't allowed to go. And they conspired to kill Pauline Parker's mother. And put a brick in a stocking and sort of bludgeoned the woman to death in the park. And of course this made headlines, not just around New Zealand. Well, I can't imagine what it did to Christchurch back in those days. But actually you will figure out what it did, because this documentary goes back and talks to people who were there at the time who can say this was just absolutely unprecedented. There was nothing like this.
And of course, it was brought back into everyone's consciousness by Peter Jackson, Heavenly Creatures. And in fact, the first year I moved to Christchurch, I was like, I want to go find out where Kate Winslet was up on that trail where they bludgeoned the woman.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's
Heavenly Creatures was a wonderful film, right? Terrific film, dramatization, but pretty faithful. This is the documentary. This is, to my knowledge, this is the first time. It's made by an American director, incidentally, which I think is interesting that a New Zealander didn't get in first. But it's interesting because you're actually talking not just to their old schoolmates, people who were around at the time, who are able to give first-person evidence, if you will, to say, they did seem like they had an intense friendship, or they did do that, but I don't know about this or that or the other.
Yeah.
And then you've got social commentators as well, and people whose creative work has been impacted by the case. So this is an opportunity to explore kind of the big why question, because Heavenly Creatures was a fictionalized film. Its duty is not necessarily to posit the big why. This is what this is all about.
And as you say, interesting that it wasn't done by a New Zealander.
Yeah.
But so it's still obviously an interesting enough story overseas.
Well, that's right, you see. So Alexander Roman, who's the director of this film, he speaks to, as I say, creative types, a woman who wrote a play, a woman who wrote a novel based on it, a bloke who runs a website called Daughters of Heaven. Oh, no, hang on. His website's called The Fourth World, because that was their fantasy world. So it's obviously captured the imagination of people abroad for whom it is still a really big deal. He talks to young actresses, American actresses, who have toured in a play of Daughters of Heaven and that kind of thing. Actually, that was startling for me to think, goodness, this case really did have an extraordinary ripple effect around the world.
And I saw a recent interview with Alexander, and he was saying how special it was that he was able to capture some of Christchurch's architecture.
Ah, that's a very good point. That's right.
It was quite important.
Because there is footage in the film, obviously, that predates our 2 earthquakes.
Yeah.
So, that's right.
Yeah. Excellent stuff. Reflections of the Past. That's screening at the Rialto, isn't it?
It is.
And also the Rialto...
We've got the Spanish Film Festival coming up. I think it's only running for a week.
It's just started last night.
18th. Yes, it was indeed. Started last night.
First time in Auckland.
Well, it's fantastic because, of course, Spanish films doesn't mean just films from Spain. It's Spanish-speaking films. So we've got a wonderful Venezuelan film called Brother. And, of course, Spanish films. I saw a fantastic film set in Madrid called Anything She Wants. So there are some wonderful picks in there. It just seems like you can't lose, really.
Yeah, go check it out, the Spanish Film Festival. Lena Lamont. Also check out your stuff over at lenalamont.wordpress.com, and also the film reviews in the Sunday Star Times this Sunday. And we'll catch you next time. See ya.
See you.